I love dancing.
All right. What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Doc and Dog presented by the Fantasy Holics. My name is Jordan Jaika, aka Dr. Fantasy, and I am here with my co host, Rydawg, and we are in the middle of our MLB mini series where we are breaking down each lineup, rotation, and a few impact prospects. And today we are talking about the Seattle Mariners. So, Rydawg, are you ready? And this is our last recording of our MLB mini series for 2020. So, how
we
you feeling,
saved
right, dog?
we saved the best team for last. So let's fire her up.
Oh gosh, so this is our last installment. So this is once again presented by the Fantasy Holics. If you don't already, make sure you like us on Facebook, subscribe to the Fantasy Holics YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter at FantasyHolics1, and make sure you check out our website, thefantasyholics.com. So we will roll right into the Mariners lineup. Batting leadoff for him is Shed Long currently. I was a little surprised to see Malik Smith not as their leadoff hitter, but this does come from Roto Champ. So Shed Long's playing second base for him. Very young and unproven. I've mentioned before, leadoff guys always intrigue me. Not a guy that I'm drafting for fantasy purposes, as he's just too young and unproven for me. But if he is able to put it together as a leadoff hitter, even in a weak lineup, maybe he has some fantasy relevance.
Yeah, for sure. And I wish we would have had Malik Smith because we know a certain person on our page absolutely adores Alex Smith. And I think his fantasy relevance would have been really higher with him if he was batting leadoff. But as far as Shed Long, he just doesn't have the potential that Malik Smith has. So I may have to pass on Shed Long, as intriguing as that name sounds.
And I think one of the reasons that Malix isn't their leadoff guy, he's their ninth hitter, which I think I've called it the second leadoff spot previously, but I think the biggest reason is Malik Smith just struggles to get on base. So even if you're a speedy guy, if you don't get on base, that really doesn't offer much value for the Mariners.
That's true, unfortunately.
Number two is J.P. Crawford, a shortstop for him. And he actually, I remember when he was coming up with the Phillies, I've watched him play a few times. I mean, he was a big prospect. He was supposed to be really good. I always saw him more as a strong defender. He hasn't really put it together offensively. He still is very solid defensively. So that's kind of his role at this point. I don't expect him to have any fantasy value. Maybe he has that late bloomers breakout, but I personally haven't seen anything that points to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. He was supposed to be the next big thing, and him and Maikel Franco, they were supposed to take the Phillies to multiple World Series, but I don't know what happened there. They both fell off quick, but yeah, J.P. Crawford, he is what I like to call the Joe Jurickson profile, and unfortunately, you just didn't live up to his expectations.
Yeah, and I saw him at every single level, actually, because I saw him play in Binghamton a few times when he was with Reading, and then I also saw him with Lehigh Valley play there a few times. So number three in the Mariners lineup is Kyle Seager, playing third base for him, currently going pick 239, so one of those late round picks. Really low average. My note on him is I mean, he'll hit you 25 or so home runs with a really low average, and I don't really see much other upside. There's not great names ahead of him, so he's not going to drive in a ton of runs. Maybe 80 if he's lucky. But I really just don't see a lot of upside for him in this lineup.
Yeah, I completely agree. Jurickson profile. I mean, not Jurickson profile. I'm sorry.
You just have Profar on the mind now.
I do. I just don't see this as a many. This lineup is just really bad, and I don't see him. If he was in a better lineup, I could see potentially him being a higher candidate, but I just don't see it much for him in this rate.
Number four is their catcher, Tom Murphy, currently going pick 240. He actually has some offensive potential at the catcher position, which is already really shallow. The only reason, even though this lineup is weak, he will have an opportunity to drive in some runs. There's really not a lot of catchers that are batting cleanup. So, I mean, the fact that he's batting cleanup at least gives him some upside. I wouldn't say I'm excited about it, but it's realistic in that spot. He'll drive in 60, 65 runs or so. And from a catcher, I mean, that's really solid. So, we'll keep an eye out to see if he stays in that cleanup spot. But if he does, he might actually have a tiny bit of upside just because catcher the catcher position is so shallow.
Yeah, I mean, he is batting in I guess you would say a decent spot in the lineup, but like we said, the talent is just still not there. I mean, catchers are weak, and he's actually a decent scouted player when he was in the minors, so we'll see what happens. But I could not see myself owning any Mariners guys, so I just don't see it. So
Yeah, there's no one I'm overly excited about. So the bottom half of the lineup has some kind interesting names, but we'll roll through them. Number 5 and 6, I don't really have any notes on. Number 5 is Dan Vogelbach. He's their DH, currently going pick 248. He batted 208 last year. He did have 30 home runs, so once again, I'm not ever really concerned with home runs, especially in today's game. I'll find them elsewhere, and I can assure you that I'll get it with a higher than a 208 average. So I
yep,
really am not targeting him. Number 6 in the lineup, Kyle Lewis in the outfield. Hasn't really performed strongly in the minors at any point. So I'm another guy I'm not overly excited about. He's just keeping that spot warm until Jared Kelenick's ready to come up. So I think
yep,
that's the best way to describe most of their outfield. They have some great young outfield prospects that are going to be
they
coming up.
do.
So I think some of these guys are just keeping the spots warm.
Yeah, they're just veteran bodies on the field for now, and we're going through this lineup. It just reminds me so much of like an Orioles style type lineup. Like where's like the star power, or
Yeah.
what I mean, where's the potential in the lineup? Because I don't see it right now.
Nope. Number 7, the reason I broke it up there, and a name that's semi-interesting to a lot of people. I know they like Evan White is playing first base for him. He's been a top 100 prospect for him for a few years. I'm not as overly excited about him, and I think sometimes for fantasy purposes, people react way too much to where a prospect is ranked in the top 100. Just because you're a top 100 prospect doesn't mean you're fantasy relevant, because top 100 prospect, you could be a well-rounded player, you play solid defense, and that really doesn't matter for fantasy leagues. So I
Nope.
think Evan White fits into that category for me. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that hits 30 home runs at the first base position, but he's widely considered the best defensive first baseman in all of minor league baseball. So he offers value there. He does have a semi solid average, right around 280. They project him to bat long term, but he is a rookie, so I don't expect him to have a ton of bat that 280 in his first year. So realistically, at the first base position, you're looking at a guy that's going to hit 250, maybe 20 home runs, and that doesn't excite me.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not, and it's it doesn't excite me at all. Yeah, I'm just lost for words.
Because of
See what
how
happens.
great their lineup is.
Oh yes, for sure. It's very underwhelming. You said it. Underwhelming. Perfect word.
Number 8 is Jake Fraley. I'll talk about him quickly because I think long term, if there's one guy that sticks in the outfield, it's Fraley. He's just coming up with them. Doesn't have a ton of major league at bats. Was a top 10 prospect for him in the minors, so he does have some potential. Last year in minor league baseball, he hit 298 with 19 home runs and 22 steals. So if he's able
Yeah,
to kind of be close to a 2020 guy, he's kind of interesting to me. I'm still not drafting him, but he's still, especially batting 8th in the Mariners lineup. But he's a guy that I'll keep my eye on. And as this lineup improves over the next few years, I think you're looking at Fraley, Rodriguez, and Kelenic in the outfield. That could be really solid for him. But this year, not overly excited. But if he shows the potential to be a 2020 guy, keep your eye out on him.
oh, I completely agree. He's probably the one guy. Fraley has the one. He's the one guy in this whole lineup that actually has somewhat potential, and that could stay in this lineup for sure. And if they build around that solid outfield with him and Clinic, it could be a decent team for sure. I mean, they've got the pieces in the farm system to make it a decent squad.
Sure. Then number 9 is Malik Smith, who we must talk about. Otherwise, one of our other
Yes.
fellow admins will be very upset with us. He's going to be in the outfield for him this season. He is currently going pick 179, which I was pleasantly surprised with because that means people aren't overdrafting him. I think some people get enamored because he is very fast. He was ranked within the top 20 for sprint speed over the course of his career. So he's one of the fastest players in Major League Baseball. He's going to get you 40 steals. Like I said, I like guys that offer value in multiple categories. So Malik Smith doesn't check any of those boxes except stolen bases. He's not going to score a ton of runs batting 9th. And I mentioned it previously, but people are always surprised when a guy like him doesn't bat leadoff. They're saying, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
he's so fast." Well, if he doesn't get on base, it doesn't matter how fast he is. So
that's
and that's
true.
kind of where Malik Smith stands at this point. He'd have a little more value if he was to bat first. But if you completely ignore steals the entire draft and you need somebody that's going to make that up for you, I don't have a problem with Malik Smith at 179, and I think that's a fine spot for him. I was surprised. I thought he was going to be a lot higher, so I think people are actually being pretty reasonable with that value.
Yeah, and I completely agree. He doesn't get on base that much at all, and I think he's like you said, what's good is your speed if you don't get on base, and I think that's a perfect example. He has to learn how to get on base, and then you can use your talent to steal bases.
Right, exactly. Only bench guy I'll mention for him. I was surprised he wasn't in their lineup, but I think realistically he'll probably be batting in that sixth spot where Kyle Lewis was listed on RotoChamp. Mitch Hanginger, he's currently going pick 244. Not once again, not a lot of upside in a terrible lineup, but he'll probably hit around 25 home runs, driving 60 runs. So I have to bring him up just because I feel like he'll be in the starting lineup at some point.
He will. I actually like Mitch Haniger. I completely forgot about Mitch Haniger. He's the one guy on this team that offensively that actually is really good, and it's bad what happened to him, what he was dealing with, and man, he was really fun to watch 2 years ago until all the injuries started hitting him, and it's just unfortunate. I'd still take him at 240 because that's like your last pick. So
Yeah,
that's the
no,
one guy. That's the one guy I'll draft.
yeah, at that point, I really can't argue with it. So if you want to take him at 240, like I said, I'm a big upside and value guy. So, it is what it is at 244. If you like him, you can have fun. I'll let you have him.
It's upside. He's a 20 home run hitter guy. Last
Everybody
2 years
hits
ago.
20 home runs.
That's true.
We'll move over to their rotation, which is maybe slightly more exciting than their lineup. I say that really cautiously, but their number one guy listed as Marco Gonzalez. I'm just going to go through the whole line or rotation here, and I'll let you make any notes at the end here. Number one for him is Marco Gonzalez. Number two is Yushi. I don't even know how to say his name. Kikuchi, something like that. He's Japanese. Number three is Justice Sheffield for him, who has been a pretty decent prospect. Number four is Kendall Graveman. Number five is Taiwan Walker. And then I have a note for Justin Dunn, who's one of their bigger prospects. I expect him to be at the rotation at some point, but a lot of them are really underwhelming. Even their number one guy, Marco Gonzalez, has been really underwhelming throughout the course of his first innings in Major League Baseball. So not a ton of upside there. Justice Sheffield, who's been a big prospect, has really struggled. He had a 1.72 ERA or WHIP, 1.72 WHIP in his early time in the majors. He has some upside. I don't mind taking a young guy like that that's been a big prospect later in drafts, going 244. Really the only pitcher being drafted in this rotation. Kendall Graveman hasn't been great. Taiwan Walker obviously was one of the greatest prospects in baseball when he was coming through the system. He hasn't looked good the past few years, though, has really struggled with injury, so I'm not excited with him. So if I was going to take a chance, I would be on Justice Sheffield, just because he's young. He had that really high whip and he struggled, but he really hasn't pitched a ton of innings in the majors yet. So if you want to take him with one of your last few picks, I don't have a problem. When Justin Dunn does come up, I'm intrigued by him. He's a former Mets farmhand, so I think Justin Dunn has a little bit of potential. And once again, he's not in a great situation with the Mariners, so I'm not picking him up right away. But he's still a name I'll keep an eye out on.
Yeah, and I agree. Sheffield and Dunn are probably the guys that definitely get my attention out of their rotation. And if I'm in a dynasty league, I would definitely stash Dunn somewhere, and I would stash Sheffield. But if it's a redraft league, I'm just staying away from the whole situation.
Yep. I would agree with you there. And then it's the same situation with their bullpen. They don't even really have an established closer right now. They have it listed as Matt McGill, but they also have Hiriano, who came over from Japan, who will get some save opportunities. So there's not going to be many save opportunities anyway, so I'm not too concerned with it.
Yeah, they might get 51s if they're lucky.
Yep. Yeah, if they're lucky. Going over to their farm system, They do have the ninth ranked farm system right now. I guess if you could say one positive thing about the organization, it's very top heavy though. You won't really see Jared Kelenic. Probably if we play this season, maybe you'll see him in 2021 later in the year. Same with Rodriguez. And then you have Jake Fraley, who will be up in the majors. But I think you have guys that are a few years away. A few guys that you might keep an eye out on, though. Evan White, who's going to be starting at first base. I mentioned earlier, but I think he has cap fantasy upside. Logan Gilbert is another young pitcher for them that's going to be in AAA. He had a 2.13 ERA last year, had a ton of strikeouts. So, in a really underwhelming rotation, I would expect him to break it at some point. Same with Justin Dunn. Really, out of all these guys, like I said earlier, I'd take a chance on Jake Fraley. Not necessarily drafting him, but adding him to my watch list. And if he's able to fill out that 2020 potential, then we might have something to talk about.
Yeah, it's an underwhelming situation Fraley's in, but Dynasty, I would take a shot at him. That's about it, though. I mean, Fraley, I just don't like the situation with the Mariners. I mean, At least they're going in a direction, though. There's a few teams that we discussed in previous pods where their lineup is just as bad as their farm system. And I always say, if you're going to be bad at one thing, make sure the other thing's at least good, and you have something to look forward to.
Yep. I agree. So, I mean, I think we're on the same page. This is going to be the last place team in the AL West.
Yes, I completely agree. Last place team.
And now that we really, I really dove into their lineup and their roster, they're definitely, I think, contenders to be one of the bottom. We've talked about the Orioles previously, but I think they're in contention to be right in that mix. I really do.
Yes, I'm rooting. That's my AL championship teams, the Orioles and the Mariners. Let's see who's going to win. It's going to go to Game 7, though.
You should put $1 on each of them at Vegas, and I bet you'd be a millionaire if that happens.
It won't. I wouldn't mind.
So I think that's all that we have for our last installment of our MLB mini series. So thank you guys for watching. Once again, if you don't already, make sure you like the Fantasy Holics on Facebook. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at FantasyHolics1. And don't forget to check out our new website, thefantasyholics.com. After this mini-series, we're going to be going through some of our rankings, so don't think we're going anywhere. So we'll be releasing that in the next few weeks here, so make sure you keep an eye out, and we'll see you then.
Look forward to our rankings, guys. Doc and Dog out.
Peace.